This week's Torah portion is the beginning of the second book, the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot. So I want to read a little bit from the Zohar in the beginning of this week's portion to understand a little bit the tools to achieve redemption, because it's a story about redemption and how do we redeem ourselves from our own small constrictions, from our own limitations. So the Zohar starts off like this. The Zohar starts off, Rabbi Shimon begins and opens Haya Dvar Hashem, that it starts off with the prophecy of Ezekiel. And the Zohar says, if Ezekiel in fact was a prophet, why does he reveal his prophecy to everybody? It was a private prophecy that he received. Why is he writing it down? Why is he telling it to everybody? And then the Zohar goes on to explain like this. Man de ragel misvatzara, a person who is accustomed to suffer, to expect suffering in their life, even if they receive further painful experiences, they accept it. The same thing also with Israel. When the nation of Israel, the people of Israel were in Egypt, they were used to having a hard life. So therefore, because if they followed the life of Jacob, they would see that Jacob had a hard life. He was constantly being tricked and constantly being fooled, and he had a hard life. Therefore, the people in Israel, the people in Egypt, the Jews, the nation of Israel in Egypt, allow themselves to suffer in Egypt. In contrast, the Zohar says, Yecheskel, the book of Yecheskel, of Ezekiel, which speaks about at the end of the destruction of the first temple, and the people are then going down into exile, they did not expect to go down into exile. And therefore, the Zohar says, when there was a revelation to Yecheskel, to the prophet, it wasn't a personal revelation, it was a revelation that was meant to be received by all people. What this means is the following. It's a very deep idea. That sometimes in our life, and we'll see how this works in terms of the collective story of the Jewish people in Egypt, sometimes in our life, we get stuck in a certain story. And we get stuck. And because we get stuck in the story, it's a small story, we subscribe to the story, we believe in the story, and that becomes our reality. We believe that we're incompetent, and we actually become incompetent. We believe that we can't make a difference, and therefore we can't make a difference. We believe that we can't have a relationship, and therefore we don't have a relationship. We can't hold a job, and therefore we can't hold a job. Because once we subscribe and believe in our own limitations, that itself creates the condition to be even to be in that small situation. If you follow the story of the people of Israel when they're in Egypt, there's a very interesting thing occurs. They're enslaved and they're suffering, but there's no voice. They don't complain. They don't say anything. They're mute. However, the Torah says in Parshat Shemot, it wasn't many days, when the king of Egypt passed away, that the children of Israel groaned because of the work and they cried out. So what happened now is that all of a sudden there was a break. They were accustomed, because there were many years suffering, they were accustomed to their lot. They said, we're slaves. That's ontological. We're meant to be slaves, and that's our condition. Once there was a break and the king of Egypt passed away, they all of a sudden realized that maybe there's another way of being. Maybe there's actually another way of doing things. Maybe we don't have to be slaves. And when they realized they have to continue being slaves, Vayinachu, they gave a cry. Vayizaku, and they cried out. And like the Or HaChaim and other commentaries say, this was not a prayer. It was literally saying, ow, it hurts. They never said, ow, it hurts. It's like a person that's in an abusive relationship and never complains. Because if you think this is the relationship and this is the way relationships are meant to be, and you never complain, you never break out of the relationship. And this was the condition of slavery. The deepest level of slavery, and also personal slavery, when we're enslaved to our own small condition, and we're enslaved to somebody else, or enslaved in a conditioning that puts us down, is when we don't even realize that we're enslaved. We don't even say, ow, it hurts. The moment we open our mouths, we create the possibility for redemption. When God, Hashem, appears to Moses, to Moshe Rabbeinu, and says, please take my people out of Egypt, go to the king of Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go, what does Moses say? I'm kvad peh, I can't speak. Why can't I speak? And he continues, I can't speak. And then he says, V'lo yishma l'koili, they're not going to hear my voice. The reason why he can't speak is because there's no one to speak to. Why is there no one to speak to? Because everyone is stuck in their condition. The people of Israel are stuck in being slaves, and Pharaoh himself is stuck in a condition of enslaving other people. That's also a slavery. That's a mental slavery, that he feels the need to enslave another person. And everyone's stuck in their own little story, and there's no movement. Pharaoh, the great king, says, the Medrash, says he never had to relieve himself. He never had to go to the bathroom. What's the deeper Kabbalistic understanding of that? He's stuck. There's no movement. There's no fluidity. There's no flow. When the people of Israel just said, ow, it hurts, that created a softness within themselves. And then Vayishma Hashem es kolenu, God heard our prayers. Why did God hear our prayers? Because there was an opening below, which opened up the possibility for ourselves to be freed, and that gave the initial inspiration to start reaching our freedom. And this is a fascinating story because it starts off with a people that have no voice. Even though the whole story is called Shemot, which means names and voice. But if you look at the beginning of the whole tale, there are people that are voiceless people that have no names. There's a person from the house of Levi that marries a woman from the house of Levi. No one has a name. No one has an identity. Even Moses is born is not given a name. This is a nameless people with no voice. But once they give a cry, once they say, ow, not only do they become people that have a voice, but they become people that have an articulate voice, and then they become storytellers. And that's the story of redemption, when they're not only able to speak about their freedom, but they're also able to communicate to their children about their freedom. And this is the dream of leaving Egypt, is that you will leave Egypt and you will tell your children and your grandchildren the story of leaving Egypt. Because the people that started off with no voice became a people that were not only great orators, but also great storytellers, and were able to communicate to the next generation. And this is the story of reaching freedom, that freedom has to be reached by first acknowledging that you're stuck and just opening up a small amount of hope.